Hello. Welcome to the start of another reading vlog because filming them makes me happy and it keeps the content coming. This vlog will be focusing on thrillers. So initially, the first book that I put on this TBR was Any Man by Amber Tamlin because of two specific reasons. One of my patrons on Patreon Sprints recommended it to me and they were like, they loved it, best book of the year. And I put it on my wish list and then I realized that it was a very short read. And then everyone started uploading their mid-year freak out and their mid-year updates and I kept seeing Any Man raved about. I was already gonna read it because my Patreon told me to, but yeah, Any Man will be on this TBR. I'm hoping to finish it tonight after I do some filming, but we'll talk about that later. And then the second book on this TBR is You Shouldn't Have Come Here by Geneva Rose. I read The Perfect Marriage by this author. I don't know how many books she has out. I will need to take a deeper look into that, but I, for the most part, enjoyed The Perfect Marriage. I feel like it is very, very predictable and you know where the story is going the entire time, but I specifically love stories that have that setup where you have this like insidious type character that has these under the surface plans, but you're not exactly sure as the reader if you're reading into it right or if there is more to the story. And then the big plot twist, unfortunately, was at the very, very end of that book. If the plot twist of that book had been put a little earlier within the story, I think I would have enjoyed it more, specifically because the entire book builds up to a plot twist that happens on the very last page. And then the story is just over. So the readers are taking in this information, processing information, and not really knowing what to do with it. And then they get their answer at the end and then it's done. There's no time to really settle with your emotions and your perspective and also to see what the author can do more. And I think that with these types of books that depend on a plot twist or like this really jarring effect to the reader, I think the talent of the author is really shown after the plot twist is revealed. How you handle the fallout, how you handle, you know, the situations that's happening with the characters as they're processing this information and they're getting this information for the first time, and also with the readers. And so all of that goes to say that I enjoyed The Perfect Marriage, but I don't think that it was, for me, the best depiction of Geneva Rose's writing, just because I didn't get to see her really, you know, put her pen to work after the plot twist because the book kind of ended. It feels a little bit like a cop-out sometimes when authors do that, and I say that lightly because another book that I absolutely loved is The Push by Ashley Audrain. Loved it. Still one of my favorite psychological thrillers to this day, but it also builds up the entire story until the plot twist and then the book kind of ends. So I don't feel like I got to see in both cases what the writer could really do because they're not handling the delicate situation of the fallout after the twist. So yeah, looking forward to You Shouldn't Have Come Here. I've seen the cover. I've seen it talked about on like anticipated releases of the year. I don't know what the book is about. It has like a house on it, so I'm gonna assume that's gonna have some type of like remote vibes or like a cabin or someone's gonna pop up at somewhere they probably should not have gone. Here's that. And then I actually did not have a third book for this TBR, so I asked over on my Patreon what book I should add. And one of my lovely patrons had this amazing idea that I should add in Cutting Teeth. This author, I don't have the name, but I'll put the cover here. This book is also about motherhood in some way, and I read the synopsis very briefly. It sounds similar to The Push, and so I'm gonna give it a go because why not? On the same day that Cutting Teeth is released, we're also gonna be getting A Twisted Love Story by Samantha Downey, which is one of my most anticipated reads of the year. And so this kind of works out perfectly because it's the weekend. We're gonna spend this weekend reading the first two novels, which is You Shouldn't Have Come Here by Geneva Rose and Any Man by Amber Tamlin. And then I have about 2 weeks before the release of Cutting Teeth and A Twisted Love Story. So yeah, we're gonna take a break and then we'll be back to this vlog to read those two when they release. And so shout out to my Patreon for one, giving me 2 books that I am extremely interested in, and also lightening my load so that I'm not trying to fit 3 or 4 books into a weekend. Even if there are very short thrillers, it's still a lot on the brain, on the mental. So I like you. Thank you for that. I'm literally about to get set up for filming. I have so many videos that I've wanted to film lately, like sit down type videos, but I just have not had the energy. But after filming like 2 wrap-ups and my mid-year freak out, I'm in the mood for more sit down videos and I want to keep that momentum going while I have it. So I'm going to spend the next maybe hour or 2 actually filming, and then Then we're gonna start Any Man. I think that I do have the ebook of it, but I was also able to grab the audiobook, and the audiobook is only 4.5 hours. So like it's literally a very short story. I could probably definitely finish it tonight if I listen to it on audio without staying up too late. So I'll be back to update you on how Any Man is going. I am back. I made quite the mess in my office when I was filming, so I had to do quite a bit of cleaning and just rearranging from filming, and so I was able to get a good, actually I finished the entire book of Any Man by Amber Tamlin, and this was interesting. I ended up giving it 4 stars. This book showcases pivotal moments, and it has a lot of social commentary and just vignettes about individuals who have experienced brutal and violent sexual assault by a female rapist. So you get to hop around to different characters as they process and deal with life after, like post sexual assault. Each of them deals with it in very different ways. Each of their assaults happened in very different ways. This book is very much a product of the time that we are in right now, because you get to see how the media plays a part in the perception of men as victims of sexual assault by a woman. The writing, I thought, was the strongest aspect of the book. A lot of the descriptions of the emotional and mental state of being by each character in the story that have experienced sexual assault it felt corporeal, as if like this grief, this despair, this feeling of violation was an entity and a body all on its own, and it was fighting to coexist in a space with these victims. I think that the book could have went one way where you're really deeply connected with a central set of characters, where you're experiencing how they are treated by the media from their perspective, and that would have made it a much more character-driven experience, because we as a reader would have been piggybacking off of the experiences of the victims. But the author chose not to do that. She chose to hop around and have different breaks within the story. And so you have periods where you are deeply sympathetic and passionate about what's happening on page, deeply disgusted by the grotesqueness of it all, the raw violence of it all. And then you're angry again, or I found myself angry again at just how the media portrayed them, how, moralist society was in their treatment of these victims, and just, like victim blaming of sexual assault knows no bounds. So much of this book felt real in a way that it was seeped into our reality. It's as if we're reading a story that could be happening to literally any man in our day. And the author is not using her power of the pen to make this a hopeful story, to make this an inspirational story. You don't get closure at the ending of the book. She really steeped this in social commentary of our society today in a way that it is horrifyingly realistic. And not that I was hoping for any level of escapism, but I have the same sentiments and feelings that I read at the end of My Dark Vanessa. When authors choose to tell stories like this of sexual assault victims that are not your stereotypical person that you would feel guilty about, when they are not, palatable, or they're not the most likable, it really puts it in your face of who they are as a person, who they are as an individual, and whatever actions they may have done that led them to where they are right now. None of that excuses, the experience that they had and the crime that they were a victim of. And I actually appreciate that when they challenge the perspective of a model victim, and the type of person that society feels like did nothing to warrant their sexual assault, and so thus we should feel bad for them. But if there is any level of culpability to be found, any amount of smear that we can put on a person's reputation, then the level of empathy that they warrant seems to decline with society. And so, yeah, I was very bothered and deeply unsettled by the sexual assault, but I was very, very angry at the response of society, and just specifically journalists and news outlets and like people on Twitter. Like that was just such an enraging experience for me. I ended up rating this book 4 out of 5 stars because again, I still feel as though if we were more centrally located within the story and we didn't have so many breaks of us hopping around, my emotions would have been stronger. Not that I didn't have emotions, because I feel I'm shaking right now. I'm that upset. But I just feel like if I was so deeply connected to the male characters, whether they were likable or not, it would have enhanced and like amplified my anger in the way that My Dark Vanessa did, because you still, and I'm going to compare this to this book very loosely, but I'm talking about the way the story is told, because you're in the head of a dislikable character that has experienced sexual assault repeatedly. You are getting to see her interact with other victims. You are getting to see how she is treated within the media, but you're constantly within her head and you're processing this information with her. Again, you're piggybacking off of her. That just had a bigger effect than us just hopping around to different characters throughout the story. So thank you to my patrons that recommended this book to me. I really did enjoy it. It is now like 2:30 in the morning and I have a long day tomorrow, but I'm hoping to listen to You Shouldn't Have Come Here by Geneva Rose, and so I will be back to update you guys on how that is actually going. This morning I started reading You Shouldn't Have Come Here by Geneva Rose. Fair warning, this segment, this update is going to include quite a few curse words. I just want to let you know that. I'm stuck on whether or not I want to DNF this book. Everything in me is telling me to DNF this book because I am nearly certain that it is going to end up on my worst of the year. I am confident of that. But I'm also so appalled that I want to see how this plays out. Because why are you playing in my face like this, Geneva? I have very few words for how I feel right now. And none of them are less than a pirate's like sailor's mouth right now. I randomly read the synopsis of this book and that should have been my giveaway to not start this book, because it felt like that moment where I read the back of that Lucy Score book and I knew I was going to be in for a shit show of a time. It felt exactly like that. But my husband was asking me what book I was going to read next and I didn't know what it was about, so I read the synopsis, and we're following Grace, who is an overworked New Yorker resident. And she books an Airbnb in Wyoming. Already, what the fuck? Why is a New Yorker going to Wyoming? Okay, so she books this Airbnb. She gets there. The owner of the Airbnb, Calvin Wells, is actually there as well. And she has this weird attraction to him. People are being, in the synopsis, it mentions that she is forewarned about Calvin and his connection to a possible missing woman. And she overlooks it all and she falls in love, or they have like a little fling while she's on vacation. And right when it's time for her to leave to go back to New York, his infatuation with her is going to turn into an obsession, and then her life is going to be in danger. And so immediately from the synopsis, I knew that this was not a setup for a good book, because leaving New York to go to Wyoming in an Airbnb, and you have a fling with your Airbnb's host, even after people telling you that you should probably stay away from him. And then he gets obsessive. And also, she doesn't have any cell service out here, because of fucking course she doesn't have cell service. That just makes sense. So I'm like, okay, this is going to be one of those like off the road kind of books. But I read and survived The Island, right? You guys were here. You witnessed me read The Island, and I made it through, right? It was caucasity at its finest. It was ridiculous at its finest, but I made it through. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to start this book, give it a fair shot. Immediately I'm frustrated, right? Grace is dumb. I tried to think of another adjective to describe her just then, but no other word came to mind. She's dumb. She meets Calvin and she notices that he has thin red scratches on his arm going up his forearm, and she makes note of it, but also says he has a nice smile with a dimple on the side. He has a shattered window that she ends up cutting her hand on, and he's saying very weird things. Like, sometimes my residents get rowdy. And she's like, oh no. And he's like, but don't worry, they paid for it. It's like very obvious, on the nose, double entendre meanings for what he is saying to her. Every sentence that he says to her could be interpreted as, he's a psychopath. He's a killer. Almost everything. And he even tells her that his ex-girlfriend is dead. Not that that in and of itself would be a bad thing or ominous thing, because, people die all the time. She could have just suffered from a tragic, fatal accident or car accident, whatever. But after him constantly making these double meaning statements that would make him fit the profile of a serial killer, telling me that she died in little detail does nothing for me. And so then she drives into town because he tells her that she doesn't have good enough Wyoming clothes to survive. So she drives into town, she's shopping at this store, and the owner of the store knows her name, and Grace has never shared it. So she's like, that's weird. So she just goes back to the Airbnb and she's sharing this information. She is constantly making note of very weird things that would indicate that she is in grave danger. And she is literally in the book talking herself out of it, telling herself that she is dramatic, telling herself that she is, over exaggerating on a situation, telling herself that it might be weird that the Airbnb did not mention that it didn't have cell phone service and Wi-Fi. Usually that is mentioned in the Airbnb description page when you're booking the site, but maybe this is just so normal for people that live in Wyoming that they just didn't even think to mention that I wouldn't have cell phone service. Like, she's talking herself out of the red flags that she is seeing and noticing. And that is so incredibly fucking frustrating for me as a reader. I'd rather her just be entirely dumb. I would rather her just be entirely dumb. Because wasting space on the fucking page, wasting space on the page of her picking up on all the hints that he's putting down and then her wasting words talking herself out of it, it's a ridiculous way to spend our fucking time. So this book is dual POV, so we do get Calvin's perspective. Geneva is trying her hardest to make him seem like a normal person, but he does have like some underlying tics that I feel like this book is going to elevate to like chaosity at some point. And then I'm afraid that she's just like, how are you going to handle this situation? Like, that's probably what I'm most interested in. But I just know that the entire setup is dumb. Because I immediately said, why the fuck is she in Wyoming? You want to know why she's in Wyoming? I'll tell you why she's in fucking Wyoming. Because this bitch, every year for her vacation, she closes her eyes and she throws a dart at the map of United States of America. And wherever it lands is where she vacations for that year. So she threw the dart and it landed on Wyoming. And that is how we're here. That is how we're here. Like, who's holding you to this? Who's obligating you to this? If I said, I'm feeling free, I'm going to throw a dart at the map of the United States and wherever it lands, I'm going to go, and it lands on fucking Wyoming, no offense to anybody that might live in Wyoming, I'm going to pull the dart out, back up, and toss it again. If it lands in fucking Dakota, then I'm going to pick it up and put it in Miami, okay? I'm going to do it myself, because clearly the map and me are on two different fucking wavelengths. This is some 8x11 shit, in the words of my good friend Brie. This is some 8.5 by 11 bullshit. And I don't know how much of it I can take, because I started it with no patience. I started it with, I should definitely not pick up this book, because I know it's going to be another situation where like nothing's going to make sense. Nothing explains why we're fucking here. But it's such a short story. I mean, the book is very short. And I am interested to see, like, how, not even how all of this is going to be resolved, but it's almost as if it's so jarring and I'm so slightly repulsed that in a grotesque way, I want to keep reading. Does that sound weird? Like, it's making me sound a bit sadistic. I don't know. I'm so conflicted. I really feel like I should just DNF this book because, again, it's going to be on the worst of the year. But to be honest, it's already there. It's already on the worst of the year. I'm already going to drag it for filth in December of 2023. So you know what? I might as well drag it for full filth. I might as well get all the fucking details because I'm going to talk about it regardless. I'm going to talk about it regardless. So I'll be back. I'll be back. I'm so, like, I just cannot even believe that this book was pitched and somebody said, oh, yep, perfect follow-up to The Perfect Marriage. And in the author's dedication, she dedicates the book to her father, and she's like, I'm sorry it wasn't a zombie book. You should have wrote the zombie book. You should have honored your father and wrote the zombie book, because this wasn't it. I have officially finished You Shouldn't Have Come Here, and I am even more ruffled than I was in my first update. This book pissed me off in so many ways. The obviousness of the story felt in a lot of ways similar to her first book. In The Perfect Marriage, the upcoming twist at the end of the book is obvious because Geneva is laying the foundation and the groundwork in one direction that feels very linear. And so there can only be a few possible solutions and outcomes to the situation that the characters are in. But this book felt obvious in a way that was careless, as if she wasn't even attempting to fool the readers or wasn't even attempting to be obscure in any way. And that is probably the biggest thing that baffled me because it didn't make any sense. There's a difference between doing all the math and the readers are calculating with you, and so we're all going to get the same answer at the bottom line, and just throwing the answers at the reader throughout the story. And I guess the attempt here was trying to get you to be comfortable and confident in one character being the villain versus the other character being the villain. And all of that flew out of the fucking window when we got to the end of this book because the plot twist came out of nowhere. The plot twist literally makes no sense to the story because none of the foundation and none of the groundwork is there. I'm having a really hard time connecting this book with The Perfect Marriage. It feels like a different writer, or it feels like a much more careless and reckless writer, not even attempting to produce a good book. It doesn't make any sense. Even like when I look at Alex Michaelides from The Silent Patient to The Maidens, you can tell that it is the same writer. It's just one storyline or one plot. All of the mechanics is put into a different story arc. And so it works better in one format in a way that it doesn't in the other. But it is very obvious that the writer is the same. This book feels like it was written by somebody else entirely, or somebody who just didn't give a fuck. I have no words. Like, usually I feel like I can put what I feel into very apt descriptions, but this one threw me for a loop. Like, I feel like I need to sit with my feelings for a little bit longer, but I don't even know, like, it's lazy. It's lazy, and I don't know if the feedback from the first book was like, oh, it was just so freaking obvious that, you know, the goal here was to surprise the readers and to shock the readers. But there's a way in which you need to do that in order for the book to be successful, in order for the book to make sense. But if your biggest gripe or your biggest complaint was how obvious a story was, if you're trying to correct that in a sequel, or in a, not a sequel, but like if you're trying to correct that in a different story, that is something that you add on to a list of things. You can't just make that your sole and primary focus and just disregard all of the other necessary components to a story in order to make it linear and to make it make fucking sense. And this book doesn't. And that is what upsets me the most. I should have DNF'd it. honestly. And I planned to, but I was in the middle of working on thumbnails, and so I did like a 90-minute sprint with my patrons, and I was like, oh, like I'm going to just listen to this book a little longer while I work on thumbnails, and then once I'm done, I'm just going to find something else to read. I didn't know what book I wanted to read next, and again, just not wanting to take the time to find another audiobook to listen to, I was just like, okay, I'm gonna stick with this one for now. But because that was like a 90-minute sprint, I ended up getting through basically to the end of the story from that sprint. And so I felt like, okay, why not just go ahead and finish it? Because I literally only have like 25 minutes left of the book. It makes no sense for me to DNF it with 20 minutes left. I've basically read the entire story at this point. But in hindsight, I should have took the time to find something else to listen to while I worked on those thumbnails, because this is 1 star. I'm sorry if I didn't say that and if you didn't pick up on that, but this is definitely a 1-star read. And Geneva's in the doghouse with me. We're gonna have to figure something out. I will not be picking up the next book at all. Yeah, I'm done talking about this. I'm back, and it is officially release date for Cutting Teeth and a Twisted Love Story. I am off. I'm in my favorite house hoodie, and I have a lot of house chores to do today. I have a lot of cleaning in my home, and so I'm nearly positive that we're going to be able to finish at least one, if not both, of the audiobooks today. We're going to start off with Cutting Teeth because that's the one that I got first on Libby, so we're going with that one. I will be back with my thoughts on how the book is going. It has been a hell of a day, but I did manage to finish Cutting Teeth, and I wanted to come while my thoughts were still kind of organized. First of all, I have to give huge shout outs to this book, because when I say that I cleaned my house top to bottom, every bathroom, every bedroom, all the laundry, including the bedding, I even cleaned my air fryer, okay? This book had me so focused, and I got so much done. So this is a domestic suspense where we are following very closely this community of mothers and their spouses, and they all have 4-year-old toddlers that are in this like year 4 class at this school, and the school is very closely tied to the church. So there's a lot of drama between the mothers trying to balance their expectations for motherhood, the pressure of their kids, balancing their jobs, their outside lives, their husbands, and there is this kind of epidemic that's going around the classroom where the kids are becoming vampiric in a way that they are biting physically their parents, and they have this weird attraction to blood, and this causes an increasing number of just behavioral complications in the classroom. This continues throughout the entire book, and at times it's a bit like cringe and uncomfortable because these mothers are starting to lean into this and treating it as if it's a phase, and they are voluntarily giving their 4-year-olds blood. Some of them are voluntarily giving their 4-year-olds blood to satiate this insatiable hunger for human flesh. On top of that, we have a murder almost immediately in the book. The preschool teacher is found dead. So almost immediately when you start reading the book, it feels like you're being hurtled towards an ending, which I really enjoyed, between the drama of the wives and their personal lives and how they interacted with each other. And then on top of that, we have a dead body and an investigation. And then we have these fucking kids that just keep biting the shit out of each other and drinking blood. On top of that, again, the kids have behavioral issues. And so there is a deep dive into that as well. So I mentioned earlier that as soon as you start the book, it feels like you're being hurtled towards an ending, and that is very true. And that kind of insinuated to me that at some point the book was going to have to slow down, and that did happen towards, like, I would say the latter third part of the book. So for a good chunk of the story, you are progressing at a pretty rapid pace, and then right when the story kind of starts to lag a little bit, you're right near the clutch of the ending, and so you have that additional patience to push through to the end. I found the ending to be predictable, but also like in not the way that I expected. Like, I think I knew who the murderer was, and I think I knew their reasonings for it, but as far as like the details and how everything planned out, that was also very interesting to see. I think this is a very solid debut. It did a really good job of balancing domestic suspense with a thriller. I recently was having a conversation with someone about domestic suspense. Authors tend to play their cards close to their chest, and they try to get you enraptured in just suburban drama and hope that that's enough to see you through to the end. And a lot of times the tempo of the book can fall very flat. And if you're not into gossiping drama between random individuals and neighbors, you may find it very boring. And a lot of times I do. And so with a domestic suspense, I almost feel like you have to stay to the end because that's where the fireworks are. The author really makes no attempt throughout the book, again, other than just gossiping drama between families and coworkers and wives or whatever. That is literally what is supposed to keep the reader there to the end. And there's just nothing else added on top of that. Like, there's no cherry on top of that. And so that's my usual issue with domestic suspense. For this to be a debut, I feel like, again, it just really balanced that domestic suburban aspect of life, slice of life, with this thrilling aspect because, again, you just have these kids drinking the blood of fucking people. It was pretty creepy. This book did not have as many like takeaway messages. Not that I was expecting any, but it is a thrill of a time while you're in it. But I don't find that there was really any lingering messages that are really gonna stick with me, because I felt like a lot of this book was very circumstantial, and at times we rolled off to the point of like ridiculousness and we got a little bit off the rails, but it felt very much like an isolated story, and that it didn't really reach out beyond like its boundaries or parameters to the reader or to the world. When you have books that typically center around motherhood and children with behavioral issues, there typically is a message that the author is trying to convey. Otherwise, why tell a story like this with this specific trope in it? And I don't find that there was anything intentional about these kids, other than the fact that like we're dealing with mothers. Like, they needed to have kids because these moms are involved in this school, and it's a preschool teacher that is dying, and the school is tied to the church. So it just, again, felt very circumstantial, where everything's just here for the sake of being here to tell a fleshed out story, but not that there is some underlying theme or message beyond this. So I'm gonna settle on 3.5 stars for this one, and I'm gonna call it a win. I had a very successful day, and I'm not mad at it. I am sick of audiobooks for the day because I've had one in my ear literally all day. So I'm gonna switch over to some physical reading now that I'm taking the night off and I have really nothing on my to-do list until tomorrow. And then let's give it a few days before we circle back around to a twisted love story. I am 25% into A Twisted Love Story by Samantha Downing. And can I just say that this is why Samantha Downing is an auto-buy author for me, because I be here for her tomfoolery. I be here for her fucking shenanigans. She just gives me all of the juicy, unhinged, off the rails, like, be fucking for real plot, and it works for me every single time, and I'm so excited for this one. So we start off with Wes and Ivy. They met in college, and they have a very toxic get the hell out of the way when they're at it kind of relationship, and it descends into like really off the rails unhingedness very often. They had a lot of blowouts that led to like periods and breaks where they weren't really talking to each other. But recently, about 4 or 5 months ago, they ran into each other at a wedding for someone that they were both mutuals with. And he sees her, Wes sees Ivy, and he's like, no, not dealing with it, and walks away. Ivy decides to call the police and tell the police that she has a stalker, and basically saying that she thinks Wes is the person. And this was her way of getting Wes to come back around. And so he shows up at her house, and he can't help this magnetic pull towards her. They have a fun time in the romp, and then they decide to get back together, but they are both still like incredibly petty, and they're clearly not ready to let go of all of the toxic behaviors that led to all of their previous blowouts. And it's getting to the point where other people are tired of seeing them have this up and down situation. So Wes is it's hard to really describe without spoiling the book, but yeah, you could just tell that they're not decent people, and that they're love for one another definitely does not outweigh the pleasure that they get from exhibiting hatred towards one another. They want to attack and hurt each other in a lot of ways, and they're in this tornado of a relationship and they just clearly cannot let it go. One thing that I love about Samantha Downing is that she will give you a tertiary character that just really adds to the ridiculousness of it fucking all. And so Wes's assistant is a nosy person, and she is like scrubbing and like actually literally stalking the both of them to get information because she literally just can't help herself. And then the detective that Ivy ended up speaking to about Wes stalking her is not willing to let the case go. And Ivy is like, at first she thought it was kind of amusing to have, you know, the police after Wes as like this potential stalker, but now this detective is looking into a lot of things of their past and other like police reports that they have been involved in. And now Ivy's getting like a little irritated because at first it was cute and amusing to stick a detective on Wes, but now she's asking more questions than Wes nor Ivy is comfortable with. And Ivy's just like, okay, like girl, like I just did that to get my man back, and like he's back, so like let it go. And it's just, you can tell that we're gonna have a fuck of a time, and I'm just so freaking excited. Each POV, like I love being in the character's head. I don't know, I really enjoy Samantha Downing's writing, and every time I pick up a book by her, she does not disappoint in giving me like completely unstable characters that are aware that they are unstable and could really give a rat's ass. Like this is everything that I need in like a thriller. I love a like let's push this to the edge and go over the cliff type story, and Samantha Downing just does that really well. So I will come back with more thoughts, but just know that I'm already excited for whatever's gonna happen with the story. So I just finished A Twisted Love Story by Samantha Downing, and I feel like I might give this one about 4 stars. It wasn't necessarily a 5-star read. However, I do think it's top 2 and maybe not 2 of my favorites from Samantha Downing. This one was not as demented as the other stories that I've read from her, but still it was fun, it was interesting. Wes and Ivy make everyone around them collateral damage in their relationship and their like pettiness going back and forth with one another. There was a incident that happened between Wes and Ivy 7 years ago that triggers this avalanche of events that happens throughout the story once she reports him for like stalking her or fake stalking her to end up getting back with him. And at one point in the book, I was just like, there has to be another reason other than like them just really being this crazy in love with each other. Like maybe one of them is holding a grudge, or they're spiteful and bitter and they're like, this is some type of elaborate long-term plan to get revenge. But no, like they're making these decisions in the moment, and there's so much regret because they make off the wall crazy decisions that involve a multitude of people around them, and then they're like, oh well, actually I probably took it a little too far. And if you try to tell each of them about the other person, they absolutely do not want to hear it. Okay, that is the love of their life. That is their soulmate. They're not listening to anything you have to say. But in their moments of like illogic reasoning, oh my God, they make some of the worst like irrational decisions that I've seen characters make. And part of me wishes that it was for some other like insane asinine reason other than like they're just toxically in love with each other, and this is probably the cycle of their relationship that they're gonna be in for like the entirety of their lives. Because once you get that addiction to the adrenaline and the drama and the pettiness, it's really hard to move a relationship from that phase into one that is healthy, because you are gonna lose so much excitement in translation. I don't know, I feel like I'm over analyzing this damn relationship. I am not a therapist. It was interesting as hell to see, and I appreciate Samantha Downing for giving us a win at the end of this vlog. So how many books did I read for this freaking vlog? I've been filming this vlog over the course of like the entire month of freaking July, so I can't remember all the books that I've read, What did I read? Okay, so I read Any Man, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. Definitely highly recommend you go out and pick that one up. It's a lot of gory, gritty details around sexual assault, but I think the conversations and the thematic message is just very important. We also read You Shouldn't Have Come Here by Geneva Rose. I would like to remove that from my memory and act as though that has never happened because I absolutely hated that book. Then we read Cutting Teeth, which I gave 3 out of 5 stars. It was cool, it was fun when I was interested, but it's not gonna stick with me. And it's not one that was just incredibly exciting, but I do think it was very well written for this to be a debut into the thriller domestic suspense genre. And then finishing it off with a literally twisted love story by Samantha Dowding, which also got 4 out of 5 stars. As per usual, thank you guys for kicking it with me. If you've made it to the end of the vlog, leave me a little toddler emoji or maybe some teeth for cutting teeth, and I will see you in the next one.